Hello, welcome everyone. I wanted to start this webinar by sharing with you an experience I had a few years ago when I was asked to coach a tech lead on a project. And he was seen as not really being a team player at the time. When I spoke to him, I actually found that he was really enthusiastic, committed, determined to do a good job, and was participating at absolutely every opportunity. So his intention was admirable, but the experience of him was something quite different. And he ended up being put in the too hard to deal with basket. And what started to happen was people were taking their technical questions, bypassing him and going straight to the project manager, who was then coming back to them and interpreting the question and then bringing it back or passing it on. And everything was slower. So I worked with him on how he was communicating in order to remove that too hard to deal with label and to make sure that his good intentions were being experienced. And gradually over time, people started to redirect their questions to him and found that it was easier and they were actually having the conversation with the right person this time. It removed that bottleneck with the project manager and he sort of re-embedded himself in the team, which was good. Now, the reason why I start by telling you that story is because even when people have the very best intentions at heart, it doesn't guarantee that people's experience of them is the same. Our intentions and people's experience of us can sometimes be two different things. And that leads us to our topic today around why is there sometimes a challenge or that misalignment, particularly in a technical environment? I think the most important thing that you can take out of this session today is being able to describe how to remove that challenge. So welcome. My name's Sara O'Connor and I have been working in this space for over 20 years. My specialisation is in interpersonal communication and leadership. Most of my 20 plus years has been spent working as a consultant with technical specialists, tech leaders, tech teams, technical staff. I've worked with lots of different organisations in the public and the private sector globally. One of those organisations was Altus. And they saw the soft skills training programs as sort of like the special sauce for their consultants. And this year they asked themselves, how can we offer that special sauce to our clients? So to keep a long story short, here I am, proudly working full-time for Altus since April this year, and I couldn't be happier. Our agenda today, folks, we're going to spend about 25 minutes looking at the issue of why is there sometimes a challenge. We'll then spend about 5 minutes and I'll talk you through the new soft skills offering that Altus has. And then I've allowed 15 minutes at the back end for Q&A. So please feel very welcome during the whole session to use that Q&A bubble for your questions. So you don't forget them, just drop them in there. And then at the end, we'll have a look at what we've got and what I need to answer. So let's get into it. As technology is increasingly intertwined through organisations, tech professionals then really need to consider what's going to help them be the very best at their job. Of course, having the technical know-how to get the job done is important. But as IT professionals expand their responsibilities and engage more extensively through the business, they need to have more than just their technical prowess. The technical know-how is important to be competent in your field. So when we talk about the other stuff, the soft skills, it can refer to everything else that makes you great at your job apart from that technical mastery. At Altus, we understand that you're using data and analytics to drive your company to competitive advantage. And I am thrilled to be able to offer you an additional angle on the way that you derive benefit from your data, your analytics, and your IT professionals. I think we can safely say that complex technical solutions or strategies, they don't sell themselves. Even if it's the greatest idea, part of the implementation is a human that supports or promotes or endorses or communicates the idea. Communication is an essential part of any change or implementation. So why is it sometimes a challenge? Why is communication sometimes a challenge, particularly in a technical environment? I mean, we're communicating all the time, so what changes? And when we're trying to implement a new solution, the question we've got to ask ourselves is, what's at risk if we don't get the communication part right? So to get us to the answer of why is it sometimes a challenge, I'd actually like to do a little social experiment. Now, I can see we've got a huge group on this webinar today, and I'm going to ask all of you to join in. Now, I can't see you, so I'm just going to assume that you're doing it with me. All I want you to do is to fold your arms, just like I've done. Fold your arms and hold them there. What I'll get you to do now is to have a look down and see how you've folded your arms. Keep them there, how you folded your arms. Now, I didn't think about it before I did it. I just did it, just based on my comfort. But I've gone right over left, and I've actually got one hand, fingers up, and one hand tucked in. I wonder what you've done. Now, it could be lots of different variations. We could have dozens and dozens of variations on this webinar. So between us, we just couldn't work out who's right and who's wrong, could we? We just couldn't work out who's right and wrong. Now, keep your arms there, but I'm going to ask you to do a second stage of this social experiment. What I'm going to ask you to do is unlock your arms and fold them the other way. So now I'm left over right. I've practiced that. I had to, because it feels really weird. Now, I don't know about you, but I have to consciously think about how I fold my arms the other way. If it's feeling strange, let them go, shake them out. Thank you for doing that with me. I'm going to trust that we had a big group of people folding their arms just then. Now, the reason why I asked you to do that little social experiment is because there is an exact correlation between that social experiment and our communication choices. We make the choices based on our comfort because it makes sense to us. We make our communication choices based on our comfort because it makes sense to us. There's lots of different ways that people communicate, and we simply couldn't decide which is the right way and which is the wrong way. We couldn't decide. We can do something different if we try, but like folding our arms the other way, it feels strange, but we can do it if we try. So the big challenge is that sometimes our comfort, the way that we communicate, our comfort can make other people feel less comfortable. When it comes to our communication choices, sometimes our comfort is a bad gauge for what's appropriate, especially if the other party is non-technical. The big question is, well, if I don't do what's comfortable, what should I do? I mean, say it slower or say it louder or put it in writing or talk to someone more senior. Before we answer that, what should I do? Let's have a look at what we're really dealing with here. After all, we want to be perceived as helpful and insightful, not confusing and exhausting. And managing the perception of us, it can be tricky. Our strategy's got to be more than that. You know, I communicate the way that I communicate, so I hope you understand me. It's got to be more than that. So we're getting to the answer of why is it a challenge and what should we do about it? I'd like to share my screen with you now. Get to a couple of slides. Here we go. You should be able to see this. All right. Let's put ourselves in the headspace of the other party, the non-technical person. What's happening for them? When a non-technical person is dealing with something that is unfamiliar in their world, actually, when anyone is dealing with anything that is unfamiliar in their world, our brain gets into a state of flux. The American neuroscientist, Matthew Lieberman, he calls this a threat state. And our brains are hardwired to repel against threats and move towards what's called a reward state, where it's more comfortable and we feel safe. Now, a threat state, what is it? It's when we've got the stress hormones of cortisol and adrenaline flooding our system. And you can see there on the screen that some of our neural pathways actually weaken, and we're just operating from that place of survival. The fight or flight or freeze syndrome. This is our survival mechanism. And when there's a physical threat, this is what kicks into gear and keeps us safe. So for example, if I put my hand on the hot plate and it's on, I don't need to list all the pros and cons as my skin sizzles. I need to bypass that thought process and just remove my hand really quickly. Oh, that was hot. And even before I cognitively think that plate is hot, I've flight, removed my hand. Keeps me safe. So that's a good thing when there's a physical threat. Why this is of interest to us is because Lieberman was able to prove that our brain and our body react exactly the same way to a physical threat as it does when we're faced with a social threat. A social threat. In a social setting, a fight response might be when someone is unnecessarily argumentative or demanding. I wonder if you've ever experienced someone getting defensive because they didn't understand. Perhaps they're just feeling threatened. You can give me a little thumbs up if you recognize that. A flight response in a social setting might be when someone focuses on ending the conversation so they can go, they can flight. I wonder if you've ever been cut off before you're able to give them all the details of your glorious coding. A freeze response might be when someone is so confused and stressed, they just don't say much. In fact, their eyes just glaze over when you start with the tech talk. So when someone is in a threat state, it doesn't make for a very productive or honest conversation. I mean, look what's happening. When we're in a threat state, the ability to listen goes down. The ability to have an effective communication or conversation or work collaboratively or be at our best, it's way more challenging. There is an Australian theorist called David Rock, and he looked at, well, what are the triggers? What are the social triggers that tip us into this threat state in a social environment? And his research he pulled together and gives us what's called the SCARF model, SCARF. It's an acronym, and it stands for this, the SCARF model. These are our social triggers that tip us into a threat state. When these things are undermined or compromised, then we can get in a fight, flight, or freeze response. We've got limited time together, so I'm just going to focus on one of these elements, the element that I think is most poignant in a technical environment, and that's the second element. C is for clarity. A lack of clarity is aversive. It activates parts of our brain that create fear, stress, worry. And when we're presented with information we don't understand, and we still try to make decisions from it, the frustration levels go up. Our rational brain starts to go offline, and we find ourselves going round in circles in that threat state. This is a state of uncertainty and ambiguity, and it can be exhausting. We end up saying things in our mind like, oh, here we go again with this person. How come I always have to deal with them? How long is this going to take? Is this what I mean? What are they talking about? But all those questions are mentally taxing. So when our non-technical friends are in a threat state, they can be sometimes operating from a survival, a place of survival, that fight, flight, or freeze. And when they're in a threat state, the perception of us can be incorrect. Remember, we want to be perceived as helpful and insightful, not confusing and exhausting. And our list of credentials doesn't guarantee that we'll be perceived the way that we'd like to be. I appreciate that it's a juggle for technical people in that situation, because it's not the time to teach the non-technical person the complexities of the data solution or of the architecture, nor do we really want to dumb it down. So it's about finding an appropriate level of clarity. And the good news is that there are lots and lots of ways that you can bring clarity in a technical to non-technical conversation. There are lots of ways, so it's good news. I want to share with you just one tip on this webinar. It's a simple tip, but it can have quite a profound impact on a technical to non-technical type of conversation and start to remove that challenge. Some of you might be familiar with this idea or this concept, and that's great, it'll lock it in. For other people, it might be new. It's one of many options we could discuss. So when we talk about anything, we talk about it in relation to the features or the benefits. The features are the details. So in a technical environment, it might be the details of the coding, the dashboard, the data, the analytics, the architecture. The benefits are the good things that come from those features or those details. Everything from it's more user-friendly through to it costs less, and that's a good thing. Every time I teach this module, I always think about, or I'm always reminded of a conversation I had with a participant in a workshop once. And I do want to share with you that conversation because it makes the point just beautifully. So I remember I was in a workshop and I had a gentleman ask me a question, and he was a programmer, an excellent programmer, really detailed, highly technical. And in this workshop, he said to me, Sarah, I don't have a problem communicating. I'm happy to talk through with anyone the details of what I do. He said, you know what, the problem that I have is that my manager, she just isn't a very good listener. So my question to you, Sarah, is how do I make my manager a better listener? So I thought, all right, well, I need to know a bit more about the manager here. And I asked him to tell me a bit more about the manager, what's she like? And he said, well, she's in a very strategic role these days. She used to be technical, but she hasn't been hands-on for quite a while. And I give her a weekly update on what's happening. And because she hasn't been hands-on for a while, I like to include lots of detail and to make sure that she's really filled in. And she just doesn't seem interested. It doesn't seem like she's listening much at all. In fact, sometimes she even just cuts me off before I've finished. And I thought, okay, well, we can't make anyone do anything. So we can't make that manager listen. We can't say, hey, manager, be a better listener. And then, like magic, it happens. what we can do is change our contribution, or what we do, that might give the manager a better chance or an opportunity for it to be easier to listen. So we can do something that might start to make it easier. So I said to this guy, I want you to do one thing at your next weekly update. Just one thing. What I'd like you to do is flood the conversation with more benefit statements instead of just going through all the detail. And his reaction, he was, I think he was pretty cynical of whether that was going to make any difference. Benefit statements, they feel a bit fluffy. So he said, all right, I'll give it a go. Can't get any worse, so let's give it a go. A week later, I caught up with him and I asked him, did you try it and how did it go? And he said he did try it and it worked like a charm. Worked like a charm. And this brings us to our heuristic, or our rule of thumb here with features versus benefits. When you're talking to someone who is non-technical, you want to flood the conversation with more benefit statements. And because they get lost very quickly with the detail of the features, they get confused very quickly. When they hear those benefit statements, it saves you time. It makes for a more connected process. It works faster. It costs less. They stand out like light bulbs. And what they find is they may not understand how we get there, but they're glad that it saves time or works faster. And that's the thing that makes it easier to listen to a non-technical person. To a technical person, you've got the luxury of talking in lots and lots of detail because they'll be with you 100% of the way. And they can actually draw the links to the benefits themselves. They'll think, oh, I see if you use that feature with that feature and that feature, I can see how that will make the whole thing work smoother. Well, that's good. We need it to work smoother. With a technical person, if we flood the conversation with benefit statements, the risk is that it can sound a little bit obvious, or at worst, a little bit patronizing. So that's just one tip of many. We need to understand a number of things and have many choices for how we communicate that go beyond just our comfort. Remember, we make the choices we make based on what makes sense to us. So our comfort here might be about giving lots of details. That's what I understand. That's what I do. And remember, we could actually fold our arms the other way. It feels a bit strange, but we can do it if we try. We can do it if we try. Remember, our comfort, we communicate the way that we communicate because it makes sense to us, but what's comfortable for us can actually make other people feel less comfortable. And that's something we can try and manage. So what have we covered so far? We've looked at why is it a challenge? When people don't understand, it can put them into a threat state, a social threat when they're operating on fight, flight, freeze. And remember the scarf model as a description for those social triggers, those social threats. And particularly in a technical to non-technical type of conversation, it might be that things are just unclear. I don't understand. It's confusing. So that clarity is something we can take responsibility for to bring back into the conversation, put them into a reward state where it's comfortable, it's easy to listen, and it's easy to stay focused. That may be something like features versus benefits. It could be a number of other things. We all know that we should remove jargon, but what do you replace the conversation with if we're removing jargon to bring clarity? What are other ways that we can minimize misunderstandings? How can we understand the way that people process information so we can approach them in the most appropriate way? I am thrilled to share with you that Altus is offering a suite of 1 and 2 day courses in the soft skills space. And we've designed all of these programs, especially for technical people in technical environments. You can see there on the screen, there's our list of programs. We're doing everything from giving feedback effectively, to building trust, to networking skills, through to presentation skills, all the way through to topics like corporate storytelling, which aligns beautifully with our data storytelling program. It's important that if you're investing in your staff and you want to make their soft skills as excellent as their technical skills, then it's important that you've got a return on your investment. And that means that in all of these programs that you see, they're highly activated to make sure that the learning goes into people's long-term memory. So in the courses, we do things like have big group discussions about stuff. We dissect case studies. We do lots of activities that really land in never forgetting that lesson or that learning, all the way through to, I promise you, non-scary role plays. It's all about activating the education so you can expect your people to do something different as of the very following day. Knowledge doesn't equal competency when it comes to the behavioural stuff. So it's important that we activate it and start to practice it, and then you can expect to implement it. If we were to work together, what I would do is look at what kind of soft skills would you like to have consistent across all of your staff? What are the soft skills that you would like to be able to rely on from everyone? And then we would have a conversation about, well, where's the skills gap? Then I put together a list of topics based on the programs you saw there that are particularly targeted for your people in your team and their unique environment, because it's unique and we understand that. So it may look like something like this that you see on the screen there. A lot of very technical experts, they love being in the back room and being technical. And often these days, they're required to reach out to the business and be a bit more proactive. And the big question is, how do you do that? We understand the concept of being more proactive, but how do you do it? So we might look at what are the skills of being proactive that you want to see consistent across your staff. When they reach out to the business, how do they communicate in a way that is clear, succinct, credible, approachable, informative, influential, all of that good stuff. We might even look at a diagnostic profile, for example, social styles. It describes the way that people operate, sometimes vastly differently. And instead of being shocked by that that big difference, that vast difference, they actually look to value it and work with it instead of against it. We might also look at, now that you've got the story of the data, right? What are you going to say? How do you communicate the storytelling behind what you've discovered through the data? So, folks, there's a summary of what we're doing at the moment, and I'm so excited to be part of it. What I would like to do just before we go to questions is share a video with you around someone who is in a similar space to you and has experienced my kind of programs. Here we go.
Engaging, professional, experienced, and highly knowledgeable in her field of expertise. That is Sara O'Connor. I'm Sarah Blake. I'm the Cybersecurity Awareness Manager at CSIRO, and I first met Sara in 2014 when we engaged her services as a facilitator at an IT conference. I clearly remember the morning of her presentation, looking around the room of IT specialists and seeing how engaged and riveted they were with what she was saying. This showed to me how well Sara can adapt her content to a range of audiences and keep an audience, an IT audience, extremely engaged. As a result of the success of that presentation, we invited Sara back to facilitate a session at an IT conference in 2017. Sara has also been my personal presentation coach since 2015, when she worked with me to develop a presentation for the Atlassian Summit in San Francisco. Sara has also helped me develop a range of IT presentations at a number of national conferences. Sara has a fantastic ability at helping you bring technical content into an engaging presentation for a range of audiences.
All right. Before we open up for questions, and I can see there's a couple of comments that's dropped in the chat box and in the Q&A bubble, I want to let you know at the end of this session, I'm going to land on the contact details. I would love you to reach out for a free consultation, and let's talk about what skills are you looking to have in your team consistently across the board. So they've got their technical mastery. Let's make the soft skills just as excellent. All right, let's have a look in this Q&A bubble. I'm going to get that on my main. Anonymous attendee. Okay, I'm wondering if there are non-technical people on this webinar and if there are any key takeaways for them. I imagine there are some non-technical people. I think there's an answer coming in that may come into the chat box. You know, interestingly, this whole idea of social triggers and social threats, in my perspective, I think it crosses, well, it crosses all humans, doesn't it? Technical and non-technical. So I hope that piece around the social threat and how our brain and our body react exactly the same to a social threat, it can be in a non-technical environment as well. So for example, if I was to say, let's camera on and let's hear from a couple of people, would be a non-technical environment, but very quickly people might start to think, well, that's a bit of pressure here. I didn't expect that. It may become a social threat. So I wonder. Thank you for your comment there. Let me go to the chat. Let's see if I can, if there are any questions that have come in there. Oh, Alice says, I'm non-technical and I found this great and we'll be sharing the concepts with my technical colleagues. Thank you. Thank you, Alice. That's good news. Lovely. Let me see. There's another person here who said that scarf is quite interesting and insightful. So I'm glad that's the case. Yeah, I think that resonates with a lot of people. Keep your questions coming. We've got about another 6 or 7 minutes. So I will be here. Let me just click through to the content page around contact. So you can find us, you can find me via the website. There's a training section on the website and you can book a meeting with me. Let's just start the conversation around what soft skills are missing and what would you like to have within the team. There, you can download a brochure that will give you the suite of topics and that might just start to get the ideas flowing. Let's see, are there any other questions that may be coming in? Here we go. The phone number is a Sydney 02 number. Yes, thank you, Sandra, for that confirmation. Yeah, you can see on the screen there, the number is a Sydney-based number. So that's a good point, Sandra. Thank you for that clarification. I've got a comment here about SCARF being a new model. Isn't it great? It's so insightful. It just, demystifies some of that that hidden agenda that sometimes in a conversation, that dynamic, we think this person is defensive about something, or I can feel that they're uncomfortable about something. Isn't it interesting? I think it's really illuminating. And it's great that it's from an Australian theorist. Very few times I get to quote an Aussie theorist, so I am very proud to be able to do that, which is good. More info on the courses. Yes, there's a question about where can I find more info. So yes, via the website. You can download the brochure and you can contact me via the website directly. And I would love to hear from you, and I'd love to talk more about what are you thinking? What's it looking like for your team? What a great advice Glenn's just shared with us, using humour and humility. Yeah, I actually think, oh, that is great advice. And also think the stress is two ways, not just for the non-technical person, but sometimes the technical person. We get a bit stressed ourselves, don't we, when we think, my goodness, there's a magnitude of information to share here and share it clearly. And our worry just goes up a notch or two as well. So being humble about that and bringing some sense of lightness or humour in, that's why people bond and connect. So Glenn, great advice there. Thank you for sharing that with us. And Alice agrees. She gives you the thumbs up. I give you the 2 thumbs up. We're on board with that. We learn while we're laughing, don't we? Makes it a more enjoyable experience. I guess that comes back to our first concept of when there's stress, there is shutdown, but when there's not stress, there's a sense of comfort. Our ability to listen goes up. James has just asked a question in the Q&A bubble. If we reverse the concept, what kind of things can we say to technical people to help them understand we're not getting the right focus or details in the communication? That question is gold. Thank you, James. So that's a feedback conversation, isn't it? That's not heavy-handed, formal, meet you in the boardroom feedback, but we need to let them know the way that you're putting it is not resonating with me. That's hard for me to understand. So the technical person then needs to be able to sort of reverse out of that and come at it from another angle. And if that doesn't resonate, another angle, another angle, another angle. We should have multiple ways to describe the same message so it resonates with that non-technical person. That's a great question there. What can we say to technical people that suggests, I'm not getting it? So thank you for that. Any other questions coming through? Any other comments? Phil, we've got a comment in the chat. Hopefully you can see that. Categorizing a person as technical or not, it might not be black or white. Yeah, I presume you would tailor your features or benefits talk according to a scale which goes from technical to non-technical. That is a reasonable assumption, Phil. You know what, Phil, underlying all of this is just clarity. It's interpersonal, a complex topic, and clarity. That's what we're aiming for. I think the label of technical or non-technical, I think I've used it deliberately in this webinar to sort of highlight, I guess, that scale. And I've just chosen a bit of black and white language for this webinar. But Phil, you're absolutely right around, it's not quite so black and white, is it? And I think all we're aiming for is to make a complex, detailed conversation clear, no matter who we're talking to, no matter what it's about, actually. Just make it clear. What part do I play in making it clear so I get a better contribution from the other party? Yep, I think that is a fair and reasonable assumption there, Phil. Thank you for that. We've got about 1 minute left, folks. Any other comments, thoughts, observations? As anything final might be flying in, I'll just refer you back to the page we're sitting on there on the screen. The list of programs is on our website. You can contact me directly through the website. You can book a meeting with me. Let's at least start the conversation around, you've got great technical people. Let's get their soft skills just as terrific. Let's see, is there one more? James has come in. He's got a question for me in the final hour. Sometimes the technical details do matter. How can we approach a conversation where features need to be discussed to stakeholders? Yeah, absolutely. So it's got to be a balance, the right balance, James, in that conversation where we're talking to any stakeholders, technical, non-technical, internal, external. So what I want is for the way that you describe those technical details to be a choice, not just a habit, because sometimes those habits undermine our clarity. So it's got to be a choice, and you've got to have lots of options available to you. I think that's the real key. Say, how do we do this? I could describe it that way, describe it that way. Because I appreciate you don't want to dumb it down. You want to be clear. That's the main aim here. So, you know, if I was to answer that, I need to have a bit more of a chat around what's the context, and then that would lead us to lots of answers. These slides, Amy says, will these slides be available to participants in the webinar? Yes, the slides will be available and the recording will be available as well. It's going to be sent out to you. Just tell me, John F., I'm reading your question. On the flip side, how do you get the NTs to just tell me a story and not try and talk technology when describing what they would like? So I think, let me see, I'm not quite sure if I'm understanding the heart of the question there. How do you get the NTs to just tell me a story and not try and talk? Yeah, okay. So instead of going into the details, so this really comes back to the heart of clarity. I appreciate we've just ticked over time, so I will have to wrap it up in just a moment. This goes to the heart of just being clear. It's not anyone in particular's responsibility, but if we're doing the talking, then we've got a part we can play in making things clearer. If we want to try and shape what someone else is contributing, then we might need to make a certain request that guides them. Can't make them do anything, but we can try, can't we? We can try and steer it towards describing the information in a way that is easy for us to digest and understand. I've got one last comment here in the Q&A bubble. Let me get to that, and then we'll start to wrap it up, because I know you all have a busy day ahead. RL says, I would also think that the communication from technical to non-technical is not a one-way conversation to ensure the non-technical understands our technical language. I guess it could also be from non-technical to explain their point of view around business goal and bringing their end in mind goal to technical people who deliver the work. Yep, absolutely. It's all about clarity, isn't it? So technical or actually non-technical. So if a non-technical person needs to be clear around what's the objective, what's the aim, what's the context around this goal, and communicate that in a way where a technical person understands, they've got to do the same thing. They've got to think about what's the most appropriate way to craft this message so another person can understand. Technical and non-technical, another person can understand. So these skills can go beyond just a technical environment. It's all about communication and clarity. Okay, my friends, let's wrap it up there. I appreciate I've gone 4 minutes over. And I'm thrilled to do that because of the amount of questions that came in, and thank you kindly for your questions and your comments. I hope this has resonated with you, and I look forward to catching up with you when you reach out and we talk about soft skills in your context, in your environment. So I look forward to that. Thank you very much. Have a great day, and I hope our paths cross soon. Thanks, folks.